All right, welcome to our 10.1 Raid Healer tier list. Today, Dratnos and I are joined by Thune to help make sure that we stay on the right track with healers. We like to get multitude of opinions. Normally, whenever we do like the tank or the DPS ones, we at least play those roles, and so we source some opinions from other players. But ultimately, for the healer one, we need probably the most help out of out of all. And we have sourced the best healer we know. Thune, welcome.
Yep, always a person of great takes on Twitter. Yep, happy to join.
Prolific Resto Shaman complainer.
Yes, I'm very good at that.
Okay, so Dratnos, let's talk about what is some of the criteria for the healers today.
We're scoring based off, usually you play 4 or 5 healers for Raid Prog. And our thoughts with the tier list is kind of like, S is the specs we're thinking you are definitely going to play 1 of for most fights, and maybe going to play 2 of. And maybe, I mean, obviously, if you're going to play 3, it's definitely in an S. A is like, we think you're probably going to play 1, exactly 1, and maybe more likely 2 than 0. And then B is where it's like, okay, you play the spec if you want it for a fight. It's situational. It's probably still good. And then the C and the D are the spots where it's like, okay, you play these if you have a really good person on that spec, you know, that you want to play. Like, you wouldn't make somebody swap to that class. As a multi-classing type thing. This tier, I don't think we're looking at there being stuff in the C and D tiers for healers, because it looks like Blizzard has done a good job of bringing that bottom end up to being able to provide the healing you need through the fights, right, Ian?
Yeah, I think I've been healing since Emerald Nightmare, and this might be the best balanced patch for, at least for raid healing, that we've ever had before. So even if your spec isn't, like, you do need to distinguish between the specs, kind of power levels and stuff. But like, if your spec is in B tier, like, it is very, very playable. So,
and obviously there's going to be some stuff that shifts relative to Sarkareth. I think that nobody projected Hurricane Force Winds on Razakan.
Yeah, Hurricane Winds 5 was rough.
Yeah,
some of those.
So that ended up shifting our 10-0 tier list a little bit in ways that we couldn't have necessarily projected. I mean, we already have tested most of the bosses in Aberrus, so we kind of have a good decent idea.
Sarkareth, yeah.
Yep.
And so hopefully that ends up being good. And so I guess without further ado, let's start with Priest. Disc has been hyped up a lot lately, Thune. Where would you rank this guy?
I think every guild's going to play at least 1. I think you could make a good argument for a second one.
Okay.
But I think the second priest in a lot of people's rosters is probably going to be like a flex between a holy priest or a disc priest, kind of depending on what you need. They do really good healing. I think now they might actually have the best mana of any healer, which is strange.
They buffed it.
Wait, what?
Yeah, so their tier bonus gives them quite a bit of mana back.
Okay.
So they might actually have the best mana from any healer, which is, you know, weird for a disc priest, but great for them. They also provide PI. This entire raid tier is like really stacked up, so it's really easy to get value out of barrier. Even if there aren't like these like one-shot mechanics, it's still going to give you, you know, good value and stuff. So, and obviously, like, their ramps are still the same.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's easy S tier for Disc Priest.
I mean, what's that fight, Rashok or whatever, that has you have to jump into the middle, especially on Mythic. That looks just like prime Disc Priest ramp timing.
Yeah, that is one of the like healer checks, I think, and yeah, it looks insanely good for Disc Priest. So,
or we link plus rally that, one or the other.
Yep.
Yeah, moving while casting does look like a pretty strong thing to be able to do during that phase as well. But I guess Disc can do that on like half their globals, so that's pretty good. Okay,
so I guess we got Disc and S. You sounded like you were maybe a little bit hesitant as to whether or not we are going to see a holy priest. Where were you putting this? Is it B, like the 0 to 1 situation?
I think a priest, like, you could either make an argument for priest or paladin could fit in like your 4th healer slot, or like probably the best 5th healer slot.
Okay.
In your raid team, but I don't think you're always going to run 2 priests, for example. But yeah, so not every fight either, like, also doesn't need like a double disc priest, for example. So, but they do give PI, and PI is like incredibly valuable, especially for warlocks, which are really good this tier as well. So I think having a second priest on your roster is like maybe not mandatory, but like very, very good to have.
Mandatory for a Race to World first guild, but maybe not for our normal guilds.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Obviously, Salve and Symbols of Hope are also quite powerful. It's just that there are other ways that you can kind of get similar value.
Yeah, I think the biggest miss for Holy Priest is they actually kind of struggle with mana now. Really spammy with the tier bonus. So that's like the biggest difference between, I think, Disc and Holy, obviously besides like barrier and stuff. So
Okay. Mistweaver Monk, perennially underrated or just bad? The world may never know.
yeah, if you're Sweggles, then I think it's probably like A or S. But yeah, for most players, I think it's probably B tier. But I think it's perfectly viable to bring, and it actually wouldn't shock me if it even appeared in the Race World first, purely because like if you wanted to bring like a Vengeance Demon Hunter or like double prop Paladin or something like that for tanks, and you don't want to play Windwalker, like it's still
you don't want to play
Yeah.
Windwalker.
yeah,
I agree. I think that like Mistweaver on the merits looks about the same as it kind of always ends up doing, which is like, oh, it looks kind of good during PTR testing, and then Blizzard for some reason like nerfs it in the middle of PTR testing, even though it doesn't look that insane. And now it's just looking like kind of mid. But this time around, Windwalker looks beans, and there's a lot of good other stuff you want to bring with your tanks, right? So
Yeah.
you know, if you don't want to play a Brewmaster, well, you got to play Mistweaver then. And so I agree with B, but I also wouldn't be surprised if a lot of guilds relative to normal chose to fill out with one of these.
Yeah, I think it's the best tier in a long time to play Mistweaver if you wanted to.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, ultimately, again, the B tier is the 0 to 1, and it's like it's not even an issue of Mistweaver necessarily being bad. It's just like either the 4th or the 5th slot in most healing setups, and it's just like that kind of sucks.
yeah, the other downside is you don't really gain anything from adding a second Mistweaver ever. So
Yeah.
that's like the big
Yes.
That's in my mind. That's kind of why it's in B tier.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, I would be shocked if you saw 2 of these getting played this tier, although I've been shocked before, but yeah.
Dude, healing is something that's always subject to change. All right, we got the Resto Druid. Potential Mark of the Wild holder. They were actually pretty decent last patch. I think that last patch we saw a lot of different raid healing compositions in both the Race World First and beyond in regards to what was brought. Resto Druid was brought by some guilds. Is it going to continue that trend, or do you think it's going to continue to be in this, kind of like average tier where with H Priest, Mistweaver Monk?
I think it's certainly good.
Okay.
It was definitely like overpowered, I think, in last year and probably underplayed last year
Interesting.
relative to some of the other specs. I don't think it's going to be as good this tier, so it's probably down in B with like Holy Priest and Mistweaver. Certainly could play one. I think you could even, if you had 2 really good Resto Druid players, I don't think you would like make them re-roll, but you're not really gaining a whole lot. Yeah, you're not like you're not gaining anything from adding a second Resto Druid, or like they don't have like cool unique utility or anything like that you're providing. So
yes,
it's like kind of like if they're doing the same levels of healing as a Disc Priest, then why would you play Resto Druid, basically?
Yeah, I think B is a perfect place for them as well.
The most recently buffed healer to the game, the Holy Paladin, which some would gaslight you and say that this spec is actually bad and needs more buffs, but I will not be buying that. I believe that this spec is pretty good.
Yeah, I understand they buffed the tier set, which the tier set itself was not very good, but the Holy Paladin's really good. Like,
yeah,
I think even before the buff, many guilds would probably like contemplating running a second one even.
Interesting.
And I think that's like very valuable now as well. So like I said with Disc Priest, like if you have a 5 heal fight like Rashok, for example, if you want to add, if you don't need more like throughput, adding a second Holy Paladin is like really good still. So yeah, I think you could potentially play a second one, but it's more likely to be like always locked in on one and maybe play like a prop Paladin or something for your second Paladin buff.
Yeah, so what do you read on the sitch with Devo Aura plus Red Aura Dratnos? Kind of similar, where it's H-Pal plus
Yeah,
prop?
I think the first Aura being brought, like I think the most likely Paladin is the first Holy Paladin. That second Paladin, I think, is probably like 40-40-20 between the first prop Paladin, the second Holy Paladin, and the first Rat Paladin.
Okay.
That's my current estimation.
Those are good
I think I
numbers.
wouldn't be surprised if a lot of guilds had 4 Paladins in, because 2 Holy Paladins, a Prot, and a Rat is potentially very good as well. I don't know.
Yeah, true.
Okay, so we got Preservation Evoker. This was the only S tier healer in Tenno before they ended up getting like TA nerfs and a bunch of other stuff. Definitely it was the most polarizing healer, as well as it enabled you to be able to even do Razageth, especially on like higher difficulties. How is their throughput looking? Are they looking like, because I think the thing that we talked about in the last tier list is that they were overtuned in very specific situations, but if those situations arose, they were probably the best healer. Is it a similar spot where it's like they're stacked healing and very powerful, or how has that situation evolved?
So they do really good stacked healing. They kind of have like 2 different builds that they can play.
Okay.
And I've seen like kind of a mix on PTR testing. So they can play like really heavily into Emerald Blossom. which is like really stacked healing, but I don't really like that version.
I don't know
of Evoker.
I don't know any evokers that like Emerald Blossom. I feel like all of them are just really mad whenever Blizzard keeps buffing it.
Yeah, personally, if I don't have to play Evoker, I'm hoping it's good, just so I can make fun of the Evoker players. But yeah, so there's like this Emerald Blossom build. It's good throughput. It's just not super satisfying to play. And then they also can play actually really similarly to how they did this tier, where they would send echoes out on everyone. But the difference is instead of using like reversion as their hot, they're actually going to utilize their 2-piece. So they'll Spirit Bloom, and then everyone gets the Spirit Bloom hot. It's a little bit more mana intensive than it was this tier, and also they just got like their 4-piece got nerfed, which is like another mana nerf on top of that. So their healing is good. They did take a pretty big damage hit.
The 4 set no longer providing damage.
The 10.0 4 set is a huge damage hit, which I think is the primary reason why, if you don't see it, I think that's the reason. Because I think their healing is great. Their cooldowns are fantastic. With the HP change, Rewind is like fantastic. It's like doing millions and millions of healing per press. So
I mean, Rewind's one of the best healing cooldowns in the game. I mean, Devo Aura and Rewind, I think, are the two big ones that I think of whenever I'm like, oh yeah, great healer CDs.
Do we actually want to talk a little bit about the 25% player damage or player health and monster damage change? Because I feel like that was actually a pretty sizable buff to Rewind, to Barrier, to Aura Mastery.
It's also a nerf to mana.
Link Totem. It's a nerf to mana, and it's a nerf to like flat, like Holy Priest or whatever flat heal based healers, right?
It is.
Take a hit in that world, right?
Yeah, it was a needed change because healers were like way too powerful. They gained like just too much throughput through their talent trees. That was kind of, they didn't expect it. They elaborated on that in the blue post, but the reasoning was correct. So it needed to happen. I'm a little worried for mana this tier. They've continuously nerfed the Rashok's Molten Heart, which is kind of our replacement for like Chill Globe that every healer seems to use this tier. So they've repeatedly nerfed the mana, and we haven't really gotten anything to replace it. But yeah, I think Rewind is... It wouldn't shock me if Rewind gets nerfed. And also, it wouldn't shock me if Evoker is like trading places on this tier list like in a month's time. Because I think it could very well be moving around as people learn to play it.
What are you thinking? Top of B, bottom A?
I think it's probably A tier.
Okay.
I think it's going to do really good healing. It's just, I think it's going to take time for people to like learn to play like the new style and find out like which style is better on which fight and stuff.
That makes sense.
So, but I don't think you would ever play two of them.
And now we have my favorite healer to play with in M+, the Restoration Shaman. Now, this is a spec that got a tremendous amount of buffs and changes over the course of 10.0. You know, then at the end of 10.0, they were the highest throughput healer by a decent amount, not like an insane amount, but a decent amount. On top of that, Vault of the Incarnate's not a very stacked healer-friendly tier, and they were already the best. Are they an S tier healer?
I think like very top of A, bottom of S, probably.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know. You could probably make the argument for two of them, but I think it's much more likely to see one of them in the raid. But they do really good healing. Like the entire raid is stacked, so you're getting value from Spirit Link Totem and stuff finally. And yeah, just a lot of the buffs that they saw in like 10.0.5 and 10.0.7 have been like super good quality of life changes or just numeric buffs to the spec. So yeah, I think they'll be pretty good. Also with the Acid Rain change that is like really OP in Mythic Plus, but that actually gives them like some good passive raid damage that like I know Druid got through Nature's Vigil and 10.0. So, and Resto Shaman's kind of like right there alongside with them now.
I mean, dude, Resto Shaman's also, in regards to active DPS, this is probably the highest DPS healer, or at least in 10.0. Is that going to maintain in 10.1?
Yeah, that's kind of the issue that they have like balancing Resto Shaman damage is like their active damage is super high, but like they obviously lose healing to do that. So could also like, I think you could probably make an argument for like a battle shaman if you really wanted to, but I don't like playing that, so I'm not going to advocate for it at all. So
I mean, during the MDI, Resto Shaman healers, if they didn't have to heal at all, were doing 45 to 50k DPS, and that is on 10-0.
Yeah. Would not shock me to see that number go quite a bit higher with new gear and stuff.
Shit.
Yeah. I think the only real downside for Shaman is their tier bonus like even after the HP change, it's like largely overhealing. But I don't think it really matters because the spec does like really good healing. So yeah, that's like the only real downside I've seen from the spec in PTR testing.
All right. So any final thoughts? Anything that we want to change here with this tier list? Are we comfortable with this? Looks pretty good to me.
Like we said at the beginning, though, like even if your spec's in B tier, it's like probably the best balance it's ever been before. So still wouldn't shock me to see multiple priests and paladins like we did in
Wow,
the past like 7 years. But yeah, it's unheard of in the Resto World First, I know. But yeah, I think it's gonna be a good time to be a healer.
All right, cool. Everybody go check out Thune. Thank you so much, Thune, for joining us, and we will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.
Yeah, see ya.